Call upon the celestial realms, the angelic beings, the planetary guides and protectors, and the ascended ones, to bless mankind and to be present here with us. We call upon the divine light of love, truth, and harmony to shine in the places that need healing and to guide our way. We ask for these blessings with great reverence from our Mother, the Earth, from the sky, the moon, the stars, and the sun, our Father. May we always remember that we are pure consciousness, the essence of life and the source of all things. May we find the courage to let go of fear and the pain of past conditioning. Let us walk upon the earth gently, as true spiritual warriors, interdimensional midwives giving birth to our true self. Letting go of separation, evolving beyond limitation into divine self-expression, thereby assisting in the co-creation of a dawning, light-filled world. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
So welcome back to a real analysis on the SnyderVerse. We are finishing up chapter 1 on seeking the sacred. We've talked a lot about the concept of the sacred, its desecration, its idolatry, homo religiosis, and modern man's relationship to the sacred. In section 4, we look at sacred centers, which gives us our first structural component to notions of sacred and religious thought. The structural simplicity of circles and centers makes it a potent and robust vehicle to analyze and interpret complex psychological, mythological dramas and narratives. So, though simple, its variety of manifestations will make it seem quite complex, but we can always come back to its basic and simple structure to reorient ourselves. Manly P. Hall said the most primitive and fundamental of all symbols is the dot. It is said the circumpunct or circled dot was used by the Pythagoreans and later Greeks to represent the first metaphysical being, the monad or the absolute. According to Britannica, the monad is an elementary individual substance that reflects the order of the world and from which material properties are derived. To generate a perfect circle, a compass requires a fixed point around which it rotates to make it. It is in this way that the boundary circle clearly and simultaneously designates spatial centrality. In the language of homo religiosis, we might say it is therefore an act of consecration to say, this is special, this is distinct, this is unique. Attention should be given to this. This is sacred, this is holy. In some sense, it is a rudimentary temple wherein the center is the shrine allowing one to hold communion with the absolute juxtaposed to the profane arbitrariness of chaos and noise outside. The circle, then, is the temple wall which helps to shield or separate the void of random chaos from the center's special and sacred status. From circles, centers, thus order and structure. Conversely, the center is the seed or yolk of creation, the absolute indivisible singularity, nevertheless cracks, splits, divides, to form an outer world emanating circles of influence. From centers, circles. A water droplet forms, falls, and dies back into the chaotic waters, dissipating energy emanating in concentric circles, a kind of distress signal. The center is the sun, whose gravitational well establishes a well-ordered solar system, the great and royal one amongst the lesser multitude. The center is the singularity whose Big Bang structured the cosmos, the crown where unity begat variety. God is an infinite sphere, the center of which is everywhere, the circumference nowhere. The center is the sacred unity of all things, from ordered multiplicity and back to primordial singularity, more of the lesser and less of the greater. The center is the self, lying dormant in the irrational union of persona, ego, shadow, and anima or animus. The center is the enlightened being, whose halo encircles their head to designate their holy nature. The center is you, surrounded by the sea of your associates and circles of influence. A message, a prayer, lies at the center where spiritual energy of the constituent flames is honed to communicate with higher powers. All for one, and one for all. King and land, community for the individual, and the individual for community. So to appreciate the symbolism of the center, it's a good idea to look at just the physical properties of the center. Like what are some of the physical things that we see naturally as phenomena, physical phenomena, relating to some notion of a center. Okay, so the first and most obvious thing is to say the center, again, designates this separation between this other thing surrounding it and it itself. So there's this idea that there's a break in what would otherwise be an amorphous homogeneity. So for instance, an island surrounded by the sea, there's the waters, there's the ocean, this amorphous substance, water, right? It just kind of mixes together. And yet the island kind of comes out of that and therefore is the break in the otherwise amorphous homogeneity. And so that language is actually specifically used by Eliade, and we actually see examples of that, which we'll see shortly, in the SnyderVerse. Another idea is that it has a sense of rigidity, right? Being fixed and reliable, right? So there's this reliable nature to a center. So think of the North Star, where as the planet rotates, all these other stars are kind of moving in these almost disorienting circular paths around it. If you're focusing on that, you might get lost. But if you focus on the North Star, you won't get lost. You'll be able to orient yourself, right? So that brings us to our next thing, is that the centers give a sense of orientation, creates a sense of orientation. So you can think of the North Pole and the compass that points to magnetic north. The idea is that there is a notion of a center that if we direct our attention to it, we can orient ourselves. So there's the compass that helps us do that no matter where you are. So you see in this picture, there's all these people from all these walks of life, all these perspectives, nevertheless oriented towards a center, right? And so they can all be united in that particular direction, no matter what your situation or scenario is. So again, a sense of orientation. Again, there's just a natural sense of its unique special character, individual character. There's something that stands out, and that kind of goes back to, the break in the amorphous homogeneity. The center is what gives almost a sense of purpose, let's say. And so now let's therefore look at the spiritual extrapolations we can make between those physical properties, right? So the whole notion of breaking in an amorphous homogeneity really feels like a sort of sense of religious projection on an otherwise nihilistic or chaotic world. Okay, so projection of religious or spiritual significance juxtaposed to the background noise, right, that we're constantly being bombarded with. And that spiritual center, therefore, can help to give a sense of divine redemption amid the profane chaos, right? So by virtue of existing in a chaotic and complex world, we project onto notions of sacred, holiness, divinity, and that itself is a divine redemption in the face of chaos, right? So the projection of these centers is to redeem the very idea that we exist in a sea of chaos, right? To say that that is even possible, to project a sort of sense of meaning and purpose, let's say. So again, you have the spiritual idea of something being rigid, fixed, reliable, like a rock or stone or foundation. You have the language when we say somebody is our rock, right? They are our support system. They are our sturdy and reliable emotional core, let's say. So we can actually get through, hard times when we have a rock or foundation to fall back on and go back to, no matter what happens out there, no matter what sort of chaos and life kind of throws our way. So if you look at Psalm 78:35, it says, they remembered that God was their rock, that God Most High was their Redeemer. Right, so there's a sense of redemption in the center, which you talked about. There's a sense of God, sort of divine godliness in the notions of being a rock, right? And so we have here the picture at the Temple Mount. There is the dome of the rock, right, built on top of the foundation stone. The Holy Temple, the Temple of Solomon, is built on that sturdy, reliable, fixed, rigid rock amongst, the background of sand and desert. There is a sturdy rock, which is sort of like a hill, where you build the sacred thing. You build your sacred and holy center on top of a sturdy foundation. Okay, so this is the idea. And again, there's this sense of spiritual orientation as well in spiritual systems. So orientation can help us in a practical sense, and as well, orientation can help us spiritually, right? To be spiritually oriented means no matter what sort of happens, you have a way to approach and confront whatever comes your way. Okay, so for instance, Muslims pray in a specific direction in a sacred center toward the Kaaba in Mecca, right? And so that is also a place for holy pilgrimage where one is can go to kind of have that sort of spiritual experience, that divine communion with their religious beliefs and God and all of that, right? So the idea is there is a sacred center, and that sacred center gives us orientation. No matter where you are in the world, pray towards this thing. This thing is important. This thing is special. Okay, so all of the physical properties that exist in a practical sense, where the rationally minded modern man might say, well, the centers have these physical properties, and that's why centers are important. They correspond to spiritual properties, right? And so from a spiritual sense, it will be useful to say that we have a physical sense, but now that we're in a spiritual sense, it's not really about the physical place anymore. But the physical place is there to allude to a spiritual thing that is transcendent of the specific material form. And that's kind of going to be maybe a more subtle idea, but I think it's important to mention the idea that the spiritual centers are not about a literal thing, a literal center in the practical, rationally minded sense. It's an irrational center. It's a center that can exist everywhere. It's like God is the sphere that has a center everywhere and circumference nowhere, right? That's kind of an irrational idea. It's like, how can you have a center that's everywhere? But you actually can, and especially in the spiritual mode of being. Sacred centers as a break in the plane. Okay, so Mircea Eliade says the eruption of the sacred does not only project a fixed point into the formless fluidity of profane space. So it not only provides a center into chaos, it also affects a break in plane. That is, it opens communication between cosmic planes, between heaven and earth, and it makes possible ontological passage from one mode of being to another. And so in Man of Steel, we see something to that effect take place when the command key is being formed, right? We see here the command key being formed out of the chaotic and formless sea of potentiality. So that's the amorphous homogeneity, right? These little tiny multitude, right? Creating, coming together in the center to create, something, some spiritual significant thing, some spiritually significant thing. So its sacred character, formed from the formless, ascends into actualization, potential juxtaposed to actual, the massive collective of smaller constituents juxtaposed to the greater individual, formed from those constituents, right? Unconscious juxtaposed to consciousness, asleep, right? The asleep particles, they're kind of fixed and staying on their platform, juxtaposed to the awakened and enlightened, right? All of this is true as an expression here, physically, of that, right? So the common and ordinary juxtaposed to the extraordinary and unique. This command key is taken, severed from one mode of being, a fluid, to another mode of being, a solid. Okay, so we see here, Jor-El takes it, places it into a similar thing, but different, right? So a similar, but just a different manifestation of, kind of a same thing, right? So now the command key goes back into not a fluid this time, but a solid. Just as well, the sacred baby, Kal-El, lies in the center and ascends in the center from one mode of being, below, naked and exposed, to another mode of being, above, hidden and enclosed. Okay, so you see it here, ascend to one mode of being to another mode of being. Okay, so all of these represent aspects of the center that go from one thing to another thing. Eliade also says, every religious man places himself at the center of the world, and by the same token at the very source of absolute reality, as close as possible to the opening that ensures him communication with the gods. Okay, so not only does it allow access to different modes of being, it allows communication with the gods. So note that the command key is precisely that, which allows communication with Jor-El, the image of the Divine Father, in Man of Steel. The command key is a sacred object that, when placed in the center, allows communication with the gods. Right? So the command key is a sacred object. It has those features of what is sacred, and when placed in the center, right, grants us access to those other modes of being, other realms, communication with the gods. Okay, so we have a break in the plane that means some form of communication occurs between the cosmic planes, the different modes of being between men and gods, right? When Superman is killed, he is broken, right? So we actually see a break in the plane based on these circles emanating from Superman, right? He is stabbed in the heart, itself a sacred center. Circles emanate from Superman, designating a sacred act has occurred, here his sacred sacrifice in slaying the beast. The circles emanating from Superman form a kind of distress beacon, right? So these circles, he's in distress, right? It's a sacrifice and it's painful and all of that. So there are circles that emanate from that sacred center, right? And they go out and communicate to the four corners of the world, right? So we have a sacred center, obviously Superman. We have the distress beacon, which communicates and expands to other modes of being, that is, other corners of the world. Okay, and let's see how that looks. So the camera follows the distress signal as it reaches the other sacred centers of the other realms, the other modes of being. It reaches Gotham, right? In this case, it's the closet of Victor Stone, right, of Cyborg. And so that is a sacred place. That's in Gotham. It reaches Metropolis, right? Lex Luthor, who is in his own sacred space, communing with Steppenwolf. It reaches the lower world, the water world of Atlantis. There, a sacred space, a different mode of being. So Gotham, Metropolis, Atlantis. It reaches the upper world, sort of more like a sky, a world in the sky, let's say, Themyscira, which juxtaposes the Atlantean world, right? This is a different mode of being compared to this. Metropolis is a different mode of being compared to, a place like Gotham. Okay, so these are all communication with other realms being made by that sacred center, that sacred sacrifice that's occurred. So the distress signal interpretation is more directly referenced in Man of Steel, where we see the display showing emanating circles around the scout ship that Clark triggered when he accessed it. The sacred center here is the ship that communicated with otherworldly beings across space-time, reaching Zod and his men. So that distress signal is communicating to other cosmic planes, designating, therefore, a sacred center. So the center, most simply described by a circle with a point in the middle, affects a break in the plane, opening communication between the cosmic planes, passage from one mode of being to another mode of being. Eliade also says, communication with heaven is expressed by one or another of certain images, all of which refer to the axis mundi, pillar, ladder, mountain, tree, vine, etc. Around the cosmic axis lies the world. Hence, the axis is located in the middle, at the navel of the earth. It is the center of the world. So to describe this, we rotate our perspective so we can see that the center point is actually a line that we have so far been viewing from the top or bottom. It is this axial interpretation of the center that readily describes how each of the cosmic worlds or planes revolve around a common axis, like a wheel rotating around a central hub. The central hub of the world is the axis mundi, or world axis. Each belief system can have its own set of many worlds, and an intuitive reduction is to say there are three worlds: a world above, a world below, and a middle world that exists between them. This is like Middle Earth, the plane that mankind lives on. Further, these are parallels, so they could also be thought of as parallel universes, and the axis or hub would effectively be like the wormhole or portal to those other parallel universes. So, behold, Myriad axes mundi. Remember, the simplicity of our abstraction of a circle and center, or rather now a wheel and a hub, begets its ubiquity, begets its multifaceted expressions, begets sheer complexity. All right? So we generalize the sacred center structure as an abstract idea that connects one mode of being to a parallel, reflected, or inverted mode of being. Here, a world or cosmic plane is being generalized so as to include even things such as one's state or frame of mind. The axis mundi, or world axis, can thus be expressed in a variety of ways, and we look at some of them here. Joseph Campbell says the tree of life, i.e. the universe itself, grows from this point. It is rooted in the supporting darkness. The golden sunbird perches on its peak. A spring, the inexhaustible well, bubbles at its foot. So for Axis Mundi as a world tree, we look at our first example of the Mayan Saiba tree. From thoughtcode.com, the Saiba was the most sacred tree for the ancient Maya, and according to Maya mythology, it was the symbol of the universe, and the tree signified a route of communication between the three levels of Earth. Its roots were said to reach down into the underworld, its trunk represented the middle world where the humans live, and its canopy of branches arched high in the sky symbolized the upper world and the 13 levels in which the Maya heaven was divided. So notice they're saying there's 13 levels of the Mayan upper world. And so there's the natural divisions between above, below, and then the surface. And there's further subdivisions, right? So you can have even more stratifications that further divide the upper and lower worlds, okay? And the idea is that this axis, this tree itself, is the center that you would have to go to climb up or climb down to reach those other levels, right? If we're restricted to the branches and the roots itself, then the only way to get to other levels is by going to the center. So it's a really good diagram of this kind of sacred or spiritual concept. On the right, we have the Dresden Codex illustrating a tree growing from the chest of a sacrificial victim, laying very much in the manner of Superman's sacrifice in Batman v Superman, remembering as well that his chest was punctured, right? His heart, his sacred center. And from that, these emanations, these circular emanations, this sort of SOS distress signal is slowly creating interactions with other sacred centers in other worlds, right? So it's accessing those other planes of reality. So for another example of Axis Mundi as a world tree, we see the Kabbalah tree of life, right? And so I won't get into the details just yet, but the main idea is that we kind of start up here in Ein Sof, this sort of spiritual realm where there's the crown Keter Sephira. This little circle here represents the crown, and that, from what I've read, represents the sort of divine will to sort of get things going, right? So we exist in like infinite potential, which is kind of like Ein Sof for God, but that infinite potential needs a divine will to start this process to bring things down, ultimately into the kingdom down here. So there's the world down here, which represents the physical plane. So Malkut, the Sephira down here, is the physical plane or the kingdom, where the divine will to create is manifested in actuality, is manifested as a physical, real, material thing. Okay, and so this Kabbalah tree of life is really interesting. It's a really interesting structure where you have all these different pathways and branchings you can go to kind of create the various subdivisions and various manifestations of the Ein Sof, or the ultimate supreme being in the spiritual realm. Okay, but it first has to go through all these pathways to get to, you don't just get to the physical reality right away. You actually have to go through this structural process of filtering, and sort of creating these different aspects to which is then united in this kingdom or Malkut below. Some people have described the Kabbalah tree of life as sort of like a tree that's upside down, where the roots of the physical world are actually above here, right? They're above in the spiritual realm, where it's like God and the unmanifested infinite potential, right, exists and is slowly funneled below into creation of, the world tree, right? So I've seen that interpretation as well, which makes sense. So in the Axis Mundi as a general plant, so we had tree, right? But a plant itself, any plant, is also an expression of the Axis Mundi. And so we see here that in this process of plant growth, we start with what can reasonably be defined as the monad, or the unity that everything starts out as, and it slowly goes through this process where it cracks and splits into a duality. So now in that cracking process, there's a part that goes above and a part that goes below, right? So this it opens up this duality. This monad begets duality, where there is a distinction between the below and the above. And so there's a part of it that wants to break into a different cosmic plane, right? So the process of plant growth captures all of it very well. And the roots dig deeper into the soil below. Okay, so note it reaches the upward and downward into the world of the above and deeper into the world of the below. Okay, so by growing, it experiences and it has access to a completely different world. Okay, the central axis, the bridge, the hub, allows for the leaves that absorb carbon dioxide. Right, so now we're in the above world. We absorb carbon dioxide and light energy from the sun, from the above, to work in tandem with the roots that absorb mineral and nutrients below. So you need all of these, right? You need both of these things. You can't just have one or the other and have a plant. You need to go into the roots and soak up those nutrients, and you need to go into the sky to get that kind of fresh air and exposed to carbon dioxide and sunlight energy to have a plant at all, right? So both the above and the below are necessary for its kind of healthy existence. Joseph Campbell says, again, the figure may be that of cosmic man or woman, for example, the Buddha himself, or the dancing Hindu goddess Kali, seated or standing on this spot, or even fixed to the tree, Attis, Jesus, or Wotan. For the hero, as the incarnation of God, is himself the navel of the world, the umbilical point through which the energies of eternity break into time. Man or woman can stand in as an expression of the axis mundi. And so here we have the Vitruvian man, and the two centers express the two different worlds that the Vitruvian man can represent. So we have the center of the square, which the square means more earthly pursuits, and the circle more heavenly or divine pursuits, right? So the Vitruvian man, one interpretation is to say that the center of the square, which is the groin, is being juxtaposed to the center of the circle, which is the navel, right? So there's this process of ascent that the man can actually be his own axis mundi and ascend from more earthly or divine pursuits. So the human body, as seen in various chakra systems, can also represent the axis mundi. The chakra means wheel, and so the various wheels that spin around the axis or central hub of the body along the spinal column constitute an axis mundi, connecting the head all the way down to the tailbone. Okay, so as we descend or ascend the ladder of the axis of the spinal column, we move up or down the axis mundi of our own body. Manly P. Hall also says there are two great systems in the body of man. The tree of life, which is the arteriole with its roots in the heart. So we have here the heart and the blood flow, right? So the heart is the lifeblood. That's what pumps the lifeblood. And so you go through the arteries, and you see all the branchings, right? So that's the concept of the tree of life. And so there's the sacred center here of the heart and its branchings out in throughout the body, allowing people to live. So hence, tree of life. And he says the tree of knowledge of good and evil, i.e. the nervous system, which has its roots in the brain. So we have another center here, the brain itself, which extends throughout the body. The nervous system branches throughout, and that constitutes its own tree system. And so you have these two worlds, two modes of being, two modes of expressions that kind of connect that are necessary for our livelihood. And so, again, we see an example of the axis mundi in the body. And so you have the heart chakra, you have the crown chakra, you have the third eye chakra. All of these, there's lots of different notions from different spiritual systems that align the body itself with different worlds or chakras, wheels around our central axis, around our what can be thought of as the spinal column, which is kind of like a ladder, isn't it? It's like a staircase, right? And so we have here Manly P. Hall sort of kind of defining two worlds, the lower world of the heart, so the emotional, and the upper world of the brain, and so the sort of rational minded. So you can think of like Wizard of Oz, where Scarecrow, what does he want? He wants a brain. Tin Man, what does he want? He wants a heart, right? So they represent the various levels and aspects of man's existence and the way he operates in the world through either emotion or the rational faculties, the intellect. Joseph Campbell says, wherever a hero has been born, has wrought, or has passed back into the void, the place is marked and sanctified. A temple is erected there to signify and inspire the miracle of perfect centeredness, for this is the place of the breakthrough into abundance. So the temple itself is a sacred center, designates a sacred place juxtaposed to the profane surroundings, okay? And so that is an axis mundi. That is a place where we can have access to different modes of being, divine realms, communication with the gods, that sort of thing. So a temple naturally has all of these features that we've talked about for sacred centers and the axis mundi itself. So the tabernacle is also an axis mundi. According to studylight.org, the tabernacle is the portable tent-like structure that served the Israelites as a sanctuary during their wanderings in the wilderness and in the early period of their life in Palestine. So the tabernacle represented the presence of God amongst his people in the desert or wilderness. The wilderness represented that wild, chaotic, and nihilistic profanity where, when in this space, the temple can provide that much-needed orientation. The tabernacle is the holy space where offerings and sacrifices could be therefore communicated to the Divine Father. So remember, it has all of those features that we're talking about for Axis Mundi. One major feature is communication with the Divine. Joseph Campbell says, the world navel is the symbol of the continuous creation, the mystery of the maintenance of the world through that continuous miracle of vivification which wells within all things. So just as the tree or plants can serve as natural manifestations of the Axis Mundi, we also have astrophysical jets, which have a lot of the features that we've already talked about. So from a science journal, they say astrophysical jets, the collimated outflows, so collimated just means there's like this flow of energy and material particles coming out in these kind of narrow columns, these narrow angle columns here. The collimated outflows associated with matter accretion onto compact objects, so the compact object is in the center, represents one of the most extreme phenomena in the universe. They have been observed from a variety of cosmic sources, from protostars to distant galaxies, and often determine the major observational features of the parent object. So the jet phenomenon appears to be common wherever mass accretion onto a central object occurs. So there's mass accretion. There sort of all of this accretion onto a center creates a lot of energy that gets spewed in these columns, right? So the column is very much like the Axis Mundi. And so further from science.org, this is actually very relevant, but I won't elaborate much on it in these slides, but that'll be for next time. They say, if you had ever seen a peacock and then suddenly stumbled across a pair of them, one strutting past in profile, the other facing you in full display, you might think you were looking at two different animals. Astronomers suspect they've been making a similar mistake. New observations strongly suggest that a wide variety of extragalactic objects are actually the same cosmic animal seen from different angles. The objects in question are blazars, quasars, and radio galaxies. Astronomers think that all are variations on a theme. Distant galaxies, each revolving around a nucleus in which a supermassive black hole slowly consumes a hot accretion disk of swirling gas and spews some of it out in powerful jets. Okay, so they were thinking that blazars and quasars and radio galaxies were sort of these different phenomena, but now they're seeing that it was kind of like the same thing from different angles, right? So what seemed different was actually the same thing. And so the cool thing is there's this energy, there's this concept of high energy in the core of the sacred center. That's an important part as well, right? So Joseph Campbell talked about vivification, gaining something from this kind of life energy, this inexhaustible flow of energy at the center. And that's exactly the kind of element we see in sacred centers or cores, where it's very hot in the center, right? And so hot that it can actually catapult you, or maybe not catapult, but toss you into other cosmic realms. And so you can think like these particles are first trapped in this plane, in the accretion disk. Once they reach the center, they are free to ascend or descend along the Axis Mundi and reach other cosmic realms. Pretty dope. So here, note there is a planar accretion disk or world where the gravitational forces pull things toward the center. The closer you get to the center, the more energetic. Some of these particles become ionized and escape the clutches of the world, ascending or descending the Axis Mundi, the axis of rotation, the central hub, to transition to other cosmic planes, to break through into abundance. Very cool stuff. So just as the active galactic nuclei contain enough energy to propel particles from its center along its axis of rotation, in general, sacred centers are high-energy cores. We have the mother box in the Justice League that is superheated. Again, the mother box is naturally a sacred object. We've talked about its sacred properties in previous videos. But we bring this up here to emphasize that the sacred center is a place of extreme energy. Victor found out that his father wasn't trying to destroy it, but superheat it so they would be able to track it. Right? So in The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell says, it would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into the human cultural manifestation. Religious philosophies, arts, the social forms of primitive and historic man, prime discoveries in science and technology, the very dreams that blister sleep, boil up from the basic magic ring of myth. Right? So notice the motif of circularity around the sacred center, and we have the center itself, which constitutes an axis mundi, right? And then now we're looking at the property that the sacred center or the sacred thing is superheated. There's an element of inexhaustible energy occurring at the center, right? So the sacred center's circular structure is an inexhaustible energy of spiritual and mythological import. We will examine this particular structure of circle and axis in general as it is directly related to monad or the axis mundi concept. Batman says, your father sacrificed himself to mark the box. Remember, from our examination of the sacred and its definitions and roots, we looked at the word taboo or tapu, which is where we got the word taboo from. Right? And so from 1902 Encyclopedia, they say the word taboo is common to the different dialects of Polynesia and is perhaps derived from ta, to mark, and pu, an adverb of intensity. The compound word taboo would thus originally mean marked thoroughly. Its ordinary sense is sacred. It does not, however, imply any moral quality, but only a connection with the gods or a separation from ordinary purposes and exclusive appropriation to persons or things considered sacred. So the idea, which we've talked about before in the other video, is that there's the word taboo and the sacred. There's this notion of a sacred marking. By being sacred, it has been marked. And you can even think of the circle as consecrating the sacred nature, but also marking the boundary of, this is the sacred thing. So the marking of a sacred thing is a very important aspect, and that's what they're actually emphasizing here, is to say he sacrificed himself to mark that box. Okay, the father marked it thoroughly. Remember, the word tapu is to mark thoroughly. Taboo, something. So the mother box is actually a taboo thing. Like, it's actually a negative thing that they're trying to avoid using whenever they can. And so it is representative of sacred in the sense of the taboo kind of sense. And so remember, tapu is to say something that is marked thoroughly, and they've just marked this thing with high energy, which has that concept of the sacred center as a high energy concept. And so through his sacrifice, he marked it as sacred, but in the ambivalent sense of sacred, which includes its negative or taboo connotation. Remember, to mark something is a big concept related to sacred object. When we explored sacred things, holy things, we remarked how santos, which means saint or holy, is marked. He says, I'm marked. You know what they do to people with this on him? So he is marked as tapu or taboo, which certainly with what he does is extremely taboo, since we know he is a sex trafficker, and that is why they kill people with that mark or the bat brand. But the idea here is that the sacred is an energy source, is a high energy, hot, dense core of energy, but it's also marked in that way, right? So there's a marking associated with it. And you can think of the bat brand is also heated onto santos, right? So santos, again, which means saintly or holy, but holy in the ambivalent sense, sacred in the ambivalent sense, meaning when you actually access the divine realms, good and bad, there is no good or bad. And so it's like they both exist simultaneously in this sacred place. Okay, so all of these things are here. In the Bible, it says he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. So here we have the stairway to heaven, of course, as the axis mundi, or Jacob's ladder. And so here we connect the lower world, earth, with the upper world, heaven. Also note that the ladder is in his dream. It is in his mind, highlighting the nature of the mind as itself a keeper of the axis mundi. So, it's all in here. It's all in your head. Joseph Campbell says, you can tell what's informing a society by what the tallest building is. When you approach a medieval town, the cathedral is the tallest thing in the place. When you approach an 18th century town, it is the political palace that's the tallest thing in the place. And when you approach a modern city, the tallest places are the office buildings, the center of economic life, right? So we also have the One World Trade Center as axis mundi, okay? First of all, skyscrapers in general reach to and touch the sky, so it kind of is our access to the sky. But the One World Trade Center has even more direct properties of the sacred center or axis mundi. The most obvious is contained in the name, right? So the sacred center, the axis mundi, is world-defining. The word world attests to its worldwide influence, and the word center in its name attests to its conception of being an orienting sacred center. It is described in the following way. It supplies businesses with access to international trade, services, and facilities, and seeks to simplify and stimulate trade by bringing together the offices of government and industry that serve and carry on trade. The center is where things are unified and brought together. The center is where access to the other cosmic international planes can occur, right? So this is where international business is taking place. And so though this World Trade Center exists here, this One World Trade Center is in the U.S., it gives access to other cosmic planes of reality. Other international business transactions are occurring. So note also the penetrative axis and circular center motif at the top of the building. This is the antenna that broadcasts and communicates information to the other cosmic planes. It's an aircraft warning light. It has a lightning protection system where Zeus's lightning bolt can be directed so messages from the above is concentrated. Its energy there, right? It has all of those features. Further, it serves TV stations and FM radio stations. This is a sacred center. This is an axis mundi. Okay, so note there's the circular structure. I want to highlight this because this is really what we're going to be looking at in these other slides, in these other videos, in these other parts. So there's the circular structure, and then there's the penetrative structure, right? Which is like the spear or the axis mundi, frankly, right? And so this really is an axis mundi because that axis, this is like an antenna. It's an antenna that is able to broadcast information and communicate with higher realms, right? Other cosmic planes. So it's really interesting. All of these things, they're actually all connected to each other. It is particularly conscious in legends of the American Southwest where the first people came out of the earth. They came forth out of the hole of emergence, and that becomes the sacred place, the world axial center. It is associated with a certain mountain, Joseph Campbell says. So a mountain can serve as an axis mundi. Here is Mount Kailash, or Mount Meru, where it is believed to be the abode of Shiva. It is said to be a library of information. And according to the Vedas, the mountain serves as a bridge connecting heaven and earth. From transcontinentaltimes.com, Kailash Parvat, a lone peak detached from the Himalayan mountains, means precious jewel of an eternal snow. Okay, and so speaking of Mount Kailash, Sadhguru says the knowledge here is not a bundle of conclusion. It is like a powerful stimulant. If you touch it, it opens up dimensions within you and around you. It is not a conclusive knowledge, but a stimulating one. If you touch it, you'll be on fire within you, and it is for you to read it. So it is no wonder Clark ascends a mountain and is able to speak and receive the wisdom and knowledge through the ghost or spirit of his father. He has ascended the holy mountain, the axis mundi, stairway to heaven. He's come to die and thus be reborn through the inexhaustible energy of the magic ring of myth. All right, so a stone can be an axis mundi, can stand in as the axis mundi. And here we have the Omphalos of Delphi from ancientorigins.net. And Omphalos is a powerful symbolic artifact made from stone, considered the navel of the world, the central point from which terrestrial life originated. And Omphalos was an object of Hellenic religious symbolism believed to allow direct communication with the gods. Okay, so there we have the communication motif again. Also, in Greek myth, Zeus is said to have released two eagles at opposite ends of the world and commanded them to fly across the earth to meet at its center. It was at Delphi that the two eagles finally met, and Zeus placed the stone under the glens of Mount Parnassus as a sign to humanity. As a sign to humanity. So Zeus, a god, is communicating with humanity, right? There's a message there. As this stone is placed at the center of the earth, it was called the Omphalos stone, the meaning of Omphalos being navel. A later legend states that the god Apollo slayed the great serpent Python so that he could establish his oracular temple at Delphi, and that the Omphalos marked the exact spot where he slayed Python. So again, it's a marking of a spot. Okay, the sacred thing is a marking. It's a sacred marking. This myth may sometimes be found on ancient coins which depict an Omphalos stone with a serpent wound around it. Okay, so really cool stuff. Lastly, we have the Shiva Lingam as an axis mundi, or Lingam yoni. And in fact, Lingam means distinguishing symbol, sign, or mark. And so the mark is a very important motif. Something sacred is marked. Okay, so a sacred center is marked, right? In the beginning, the very idea of something being a center is like, this is distinguished from everything else. And so a distinguishing symbol or something tapu, something that's marked thoroughly, is a very important property of something that's sacred. And so from learnreligions.com, they say, for a sincere devotee, the linga is not merely a block of stone, right? It's not just like a piece of rock, right? It is all radiant. It talks to him. So here we have the communication motif, raises him above body consciousness. So again, we have the axis mundi ascension motif, and helps him communicate with the Lord. Again, communicating with divine beings, God or gods, whatever they may be in any belief system. It's a place one goes to commune with the divine. And this is all we've been talking about for sacred and holy things, is that there is this communication, communion with divine things, and we go to them. But now we have a particular structure, which is what we're going to look at in the next two videos on this last section. Is there's a circularity defining that center, but the center is actually penetrative and therefore defines an axis. And that axis mundi is where one goes to transition and transform into various modes of being. And this idea is very general. And so it can be a mental state of being. It can be like expressed in some physical manner, right? Going from Atlantis to going to Themyscira, from going to Gotham, going to Metropolis. Different modes of being are accessed through the axis mundi. Okay, and so we'll leave it there. Thanks for watching, and we'll continue with the next two videos in this section. Then we'll wrap it up for chapter 1. All right, so thanks for watching. Peace and blessings. May we all find peace amidst the impending AI takeover. All right, bye.